Hi, I'm Andrew Skurka. I've been backpacking for about 25 years. I was the first person to hike the Great Western Loop and the Sea-to-Sea route, and also completed a 4,700 mile trip around Alaska and the Yukon. Today I manage a backpack guiding company. We run about 50 or 60 trips a year in places like Utah, the High Sierra, Alaska, and Yellowstone. This is part of a weekly video series that I do with the Trek. We've really enjoyed reading all of your questions and comments from past episodes, so today we're going to do another mailbag episode. Please, if you have additional questions or comments, leave a comment below. Also make sure to like and subscribe. If we select one of your questions, we will send you one of these Trek branded buffs.
So these are questions from your best backpacking tents for any adventure video. At Marshall Law 70 asks, can you please talk about hammocks?
Yeah, I don't think I talked about hammocks that much in that episode. So hammocks they're not that popular, but I think it's probably more because people don't know how to inherently use hammocks, and it's not necessarily so much a reflection of their performance. I think it's very natural for people to sleep on the ground because it's not that different from sleeping in a normal bed, right? It's kind of, you lay down vertical on something kind of soft and cushy inside of a tent, and it's sort of the way that almost everyone is introduced to the outdoors that way, and it's very similar to what we do on a day-to-day basis. So that's the reason why a lot of people sleep on the ground. But for one particular environment, hammocks make a lot of sense. And that environment is going to be any place where there are way more opportunities to hang a hammock than there are to sleep on the ground. So I'm specifically thinking of, say, the Appalachian Trail, where there are ground sites, but only because they've been like hammered in by decades of use. They tend to be rocky, rooty. They collect water because of how hard compact the ground is. They're sloping. So the ground sites on the Appalachian Trail are typically kind of bad. In comparison, there are trees all over the Appalachian Trail, and you could set up a hammock between two trees and sort of liberate yourself from that poor ground camping experience. In addition to the Appalachian Trail, you can also use hammocks in other places where there are lots of trees. So I'm thinking the Great Lakes, I'm thinking the Southeast, I'm thinking more jungle environments like, say, Central America, or even you could use a hammock, say, in the Pacific Northwest, although there you start getting into the very large tree issue. I have heard of people using hammocks on trails that we wouldn't necessarily associate with heavy forests. So something like the John Muir Trail. And I think the challenge there becomes that on something like the John Muir Trail in the High Sierra, there are an abundance of really wonderful ground campsites, and there just aren't as many places to hang a hammock, but you certainly still can. But I think that the same way that ground sleepers need to be selective about where they're camping on the Appalachian Trail, it's the inverse of that in the High Sierra, where hammock sleepers need to be very intentional about where they're planning on camping and setting up their hammock. We could certainly do an entire video in the future dedicated to hammocks, but I think for now I'll leave that where it is.
At Alberto says, hello, how are you? I have a question for the materials. I've seen some Hilleberg tents that utilize a polyamide fabric. What are your thoughts on that one?
So I actually looked this up. Hilleberg, which is a phenomenal tent maker, if I was ever going to do like a polar expedition, I would absolutely be looking at a Hilleberg tent. Their fabric, the fabric that they use is just ripstop nylon coated on both sides with silicone. So silicone on this side, silicone on this side. It's no different than the silicone impregnated nylons that other cottage manufacturers use. They do have like a proprietary version. I think it's called Curlon. I don't know what the actual differences are between that and the premium sil nylons that other manufacturers are using. I can assure you that Hilleberg, they're, like I said, a phenomenal tent maker. That's a high quality product. Hi, bud. But as far as the material itself, it's really not that different. The one thing I'm uncertain about with Hilleberg is whether their tents come with taped seams. I don't know the answer to that. As I mentioned in the shelter video, a double-coated silicone nylon has the challenge of that you can't tape the seams. You need to use a silicone glue in order to do that. This is one of my two fur babies, Luxor, also known as Lux or Luxy Boo Boo. Amanda calls him Nugget. He's very sweet and he likes to eat.
At Christy Not Done Yet says, it sounds like you are suggesting UL tents are more for through hiking or crushing crazy miles, and the double wall heavier tents are for the weekend trips. I'm a 60 plus backpacker and I need UL gear for even short trips in the Sierra just to even be able to go.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I wasn't necessarily making the argument that if you're a weekend warrior that you don't need ultralight equipment. If you're out for a more leisurely hike, and leisurely is a relative word, right? It's like what might be leisurely for me might not be leisurely for somebody else. So if you're out for a more leisurely hike, you can afford to carry more stuff and heavier things that are a little bit more luxurious because the effort of carrying them isn't that significant. But certainly if you're in your 60s, carrying ultralight equipment, it allows you maybe just to get out at all, period. And then it definitely allows you to extend your adventurous backpacking years because you can still get pretty far out. You can still do some adventurous routes, but only because your backpack doesn't weigh that much.
At NDB3601 asks, what are your thoughts on bear bells?
So personally, I don't use bear bells. Personally, I don't think I could hike with someone who has bear bells. I'm not sure what a bear scientist would say as far as their effectiveness. I've never seen anything to suggest that they're effective. I think a much more tolerable way of making a bear known that you're around is just vocally calling out, like whatever you might want to say, the hey bear, or beautiful day, or good morning. And you especially want to be making those sorts of noises when you have limited visibility and when there is a lot of ambient noise where a bear wouldn't be able to hear you coming. And actually, I'm going to say there are 3 situations where you really want to be making a lot of noise. So limited visibility, because the bear can't see you. A lot of ambient white noise. So I'm thinking a very windy day or a creek or a river, just the ambient noise of that water. And then the third thing would be is if the wind is coming, if you're walking into the wind, so the wind is in your face, that would mean that the bear can't smell you because your scent is being carried away from the bear rather than towards the bear.
At Steve Wright 2241 asks, what are your thoughts on air horns?
I've never carried an air horn. I've never seen research from a bear scientist supporting the idea of an air horn. I do think though that relative to if I had my option of carrying bear bells or an air horn, I definitely would carry the air horn because I think the air horn would be very effective in getting a bear's attention and alerting the bear that you're around. I think my choice has always been bear spray versus air horn, just as far as a weight trade-off. I'm going to take one, and at that point I'd much rather have the bear spray, and I would rather just use my voice to alert the bear that I'm around. I don't know what the decibel level is on an air horn, but I'm certain that I can come probably pretty close yelling at the top of my lungs at a bear. And my personal experience also has been that my voice has always been enough for a bear to hear me. I don't think that an air horn, I've never felt like, I needed to be louder to get that bear's attention. If the bear is closer, then you kind of have 2 options. And if you're uncomfortably close to the bear. So if the bear hasn't smelled you and hasn't seen you, I would just start walking backwards and giving myself more distance from that bear. And then maybe I would try then to observe it and just enjoy that moment. If I do need to let the bear know I'm there, then I'll do one of 2 things. I will either call out to the bear and loudly and let the bear know I'm there, or I will also move in such a way that I can get downwind of the bear and let my scent be carried by the wind towards the bear. And the bears actually smell much better than they see. So once that bear catches my scent, my experience usually is that bear is leaving. It's not going to stick around waiting to see this human being.
At Backcountry Hiker says, I've seen bear containers that you can't see through, but the one that you have in hand is clear. Is there a problem with the clear see-through container?
Yeah, I don't think there's any problem. I think maybe the question is asking, is it a problem that the bear can see what's in it? That bear vault that I am carrying, which is the clear one, that is certified by the IGBC, the Interagency Grizzly Bear Coalition, and it has survived the test with a caged bear for an hour without having anything more than a quarter-sized hole in it. or maybe a dime-sized hole. So I'm not worried about that bear canister being see-through. And in fact, I actually really see that as an advantage of the bear vault, because I can see what's in my canister and I can dig down the sides of it to get at those peanut M&Ms or that bag of Pringles or whatever dinner we might be having tonight.
At Randall Martin 22 says, do you ever use the approach of eating dinner before getting to camp to avoid eating near your campsite?
It is good practice in bear habitat, especially in grizzly bear habitat, also in black bear habitat, especially if you're in an area where the black bears really associate humans with food, to not be cooking where you camp. You might have heard of the golden triangle, where you're supposed to camp and cook and store your food 100 yards away from each other in some sort of triangle. I think probably the more effective thing to do if you're worried about it is to just say at 5 o'clock you pull up, you have dinner, and then you hike another 20 or 30 minutes, by which time you'll have gone about a mile, maybe a mile and a half, and then you go ahead and camp there. That will leave at least all of like your cooking smells in some very distant area, and that will maybe make it less likely that a bear will come into camp. These are the sorts of precautions that you would be taking more if you were a soloist or in a small group, like 2 people, maybe 3 people. My experience with hiking with bigger groups is that bears want nothing to do with us. There's too much smell, there's too much sound, there are too many people. And that would be especially the case in areas where bears are hunted. So that would be like your national forest lands and most places, even the parks up in Alaska.
At Steve Tucker 9181 says, if a bear attacks your tent, spray yourself with bear spray. Bears don't like spicy food.
Yeah, I have no idea. I think if a bear attacks your tent, what do you do? I mean, there are 2 scenarios there. Like if you think about it from the bear's perspective, the bear is attacking your tent either because it wants the food that's in your tent, or it's attacking your tent because you're in the tent. And I'm not sure, it just would sort of depend. If you are in a situation where there's a predatory bear attack, where for like no provoked reason a bear is attacking you, at that point you actually do want to try to defend yourself, because the bear is trying to kill you and eat you. If the bear is just going after your food, you kind of have 2 options. You can either try to protect your food by making lots of noise and throwing things at the bear and yelling at it and doing all sorts of things, or I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Wouldn't be the first thing I did, but you can also abandon your food. You could strongly argue that for your own personal safety, the best thing you could do is to let the bear have your food. Of course, that is now a problem bear. It probably will do it again, but for your sake, that's probably the right decision to make.
So don't spray yourself with bear spray?
Yeah, definitely don't spray yourself with bear spray. I'm hoping that was a joke. Bear spray, if you've ever had it go off nearby or seen someone get sprayed with bear spray, it's horrible. And not just in that initial fog of capsaicin, the cayenne pepper active ingredient. It's not just awful, that airborne spray, but the problem is that anything that it gets on is basically unusable and you'll have to throw it out. So if it gets on a sleeping bag, if it gets on a backpack strap, if it gets on a pair of trekking pants, if it gets on your rain gear, if it gets on your food bag, basically anything that it touches, you can't use it, because just touching it, in fact, I've had this happen a couple of times where there've been accidental discharges of bear spray. I remember one time it sprayed someone's trekking pants. They couldn't wear their pants. We tried multiple times to clean them. We rinsed them out. We washed them. We put Dr. Bronner's and water in a lock sack and shook it up and let it sit for a day. And there was just no saving those pants. So you really don't want accidental discharges of bear spray. Whenever you are carrying bear spray, or people in your group are carrying bear spray, there really needs to be a thorough tutorial on bear spray best practices to make sure that it does not go off inside your group accidentally. Thank you very much for watching. We've enjoyed all your questions and comments. If you have additional ones that we can do for a mailbag episode, please leave a comment below. Also make sure to like and subscribe, because we always ask you to do that. If you're interested in one of my guided trips, we are full for the 2026 season, but we will be opening registrations for the 2027 season in December. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you next week.